Hi there, everybody. I hope everyone's sitting comfortably because we're about to go on a roller coaster and a really whiz-stop tour of probably the emotional dynamic that you have in any one day. So, if you think about it, most of us in any one day can experience frustration, stress, anxiety, joy, fear. There's so many emotions that fly around, and that's just before we even get into work half the time. So what I would invite you to think about is, what is it that begins to derail your day? So the slide you have on your screen now, some of the expressions that when we're coaching people that pop up is that they're on an emotional treadmill. They feel like they're having a pity party. They're in sustainable denial. That's one of my favourites, that we're all okay, we'll keep going and we'll keep going and we keep going, and actually sometimes it's better to take a breath and not keep going. So what is it that derails your day? And it could be several things over a day. This is a profile of one of my coaching clients that is a partner and leader in a firm in the south. And in any one day, these are some of the areas that derail that person, that they actually work permanently in a derailed state is one of the things that we recognised. This is because that person feels that they have what they call imposter syndrome, that someone's going to find them out, that actually secretly they're not great at their job when actually they're amazing at their job. This in turn causes massive stress. This in turn causes the person to overwork, to overcompensate. So these are some of the areas that we've identified with this person. The reason I'm sharing this profile with you and the next profile with you is to share this is actually real for anybody. And one of the things that we discover through the work that we do is that often people think it's not them, it's other people. So the first step is to start to recognise, what is it that's in you that stops you moving forward and stops you actually not derailing in any one day. This is another coaching client who, again, is a leader within their field. They feel inadequate, they feel not good enough, their confidence is low, and one of the areas that they wanted to work on is to build their confidence with their peers at board level. Hugely successful individual, and actually the outcome is that individual now has stepped forward and grown in their confidence through some of the work that we're about to do a visit on now. So you are the expert on you. It's your story. You are who you are. How you behave and perform is in your management and within your gift. So actually, the danger of not starting to put a spotlight on where you are and how you manage your day is possibly a bigger risk than thinking, actually, maybe it would be a good idea for me to visit some of this stuff, this technical term in the emotional development. I'm not particularly going to read every slide to you because I think you can read them. One of the things that we work hard on is to empower people to take personal responsibility. And some of the questions that we often are fielded are, what can I do about A and other? And typically one of our responses is to look to you first to say, what can you influence and where can you take personal responsibility? I kind of found this and thought it was rather fabulous, so I wanted to share it with you. So, in any one day, in probably within any 1 minute, how you are, which is your state, will influence how you behave, which will then drive your performance, which then impacts on your state. So, for example, you wake up late, that puts you on the back foot. You then are running late through the morning to get yourself out of your house, and depending on your what you have to do before you get out of the house, that can impact on your time management. You then get in your car and you realise that there's a flat tyre. So all this has happened before you've even thought about or even reached work. So how you are and the state and the impact of that process, and those things that have gone wrong will impact on your state, and then that will impact on your behaviour. It's about how do you bounce back? What is it you need to do to manage that situation to let it not derail you as potentially it can derail you? We have thousands of thoughts and emotions and experiences and those stories that go around our head, and that really does impact and drives every relationship, every job, every work, every project that we do. So for me, this slide captures that cycle, if you like, and that's such a quick cycle. It can change in seconds sometimes, depending on what environment you're in. So in any one day, you have absolutely millions of triggers, biggest one being yourself. The triggers impact and inform how you feel in that second and in that moment. And then how you feel impacts on your behaviour. And then your behaviour impacts on the outcome of that situation. If I invited you to draw an imaginary line underneath the word feeling, so that trigger and feeling, line, behaviour and outcome, basically what happens there is the trigger and feeling are what they are. You've got up late, you're late, time is escaping you, there's a flat tyre, that's the trigger, you'll have a feeling and a reaction to it. How you behave is a choice if you can rationalise and understand the feeling and the thoughts that are going on. And this is the bit that we're going to focus on for a minute now. So if we're not able to pull apart, that's a trigger, that's my feeling, and that's the behaviour, then what happens is we go from trigger to behaviour to outcome, which fundamentally we could call emotional hijacking. So if our emotions begin to hijack us, potentially, this is what can happen. There is a physiological reaction, and actually we can have some sort of, I don't know, some people, when I see them get anxious, short of breath, obviously the heart rate goes up, they feel a bit ill. When I see people who maybe are a little bit agitated or angry, can be a similar thing. So if this emotional hijacking occurs for you, and whatever the trigger is, this is about starting to look at how do we actually manage that, which is quite a big question, really. Two reasons it's a big question is the majority of people that I work with or come across often would be a little reticent as soon as you mention the word emotion and business and work. And the other thing is that people like to probably think that they have their emotions in check or managed, if you like, and that in itself can be a bit of a challenge. So really what we're looking at here is you beginning to put a spotlight and recognise in any 1 minute how you're feeling. And we're going to build up a bit of a picture for you to culminate in a bit of an activity by the end of these slides. So if you haven't got a piece of paper and a pen, now's a good time to grab one. So what happens next is your emotions hijack what's going on for you. That then impacts on your state, which goes back to that previous slide, which then impacts on your behaviour, which then impacts on your performance, either in the office or if you're at home rolling along with your family. That can make you radgy, that can put you through the stratosphere with lots of different outcomes and behaviour. So in terms of at work, there's a few myths. Working with a number of leaders that I do, a lot of people like to think at a leadership level or a management level that, you know, they're pretty good and they're emotionally intelligent. And a lot of people are, to be fair. If we push a little bit and ask about how they are on their emotional agility or their emotional literacy, and we start to change the wording slightly, some things start to sort of flake away a bit. And these are some of the myths that surround the fact that actually to perform and to manage and to do your job brilliantly, of which you're all very capable and able, if we can actually become very aware and be fulfilling a self-leadership role around our emotions, then you become even more brilliant than you already are. So some of the myths that surround emotional leadership are that it's a little bit unbecoming, it undermines authority, it reveals a lack of control. So, people showing an emotion at work is often sort of frowned upon, if you like. And the weakness and vulnerability is a massive player in this arena to allow people to perform. So Brené Brown is someone that I follow, fantastic woman who spends her life and all of her research working with people to explore vulnerability and people being worthy. You'll notice on there that there's a fantastic graphic. So one of your homeworks from today is, if you've not watched it already, I would say go and watch the film Inside Out. So the graphic there is from Inside Out, and those characters are representation of people's emotions, or the person's emotion that the film's about. So there's joy, anger, I can't remember them all, which is a bit naughty, sorry. So if anything comes out of today, I'd advocate go and watch that tonight and enjoy it. One of the things that comes out of this quote from Brené is that we attempt to disown our difficult stories. So when I work with people, the chatter that goes on in all of our heads, everybody has it. So you might have the trigger, you may have the emotional reaction, and then this chatter starts building and these stories start escalating in our head, and we start to lock into a particular way of thinking around things. So what happens then is we escalate in our own mind's eye through some of that chatter, something that maybe doesn't need escalating, something that probably if we could get to check in on what the emotional response is prior to the story, we can begin to actually change our behaviour, which would change the outcome. So this is quite a nice quote to understand this. Brené does a lot of work around this, and the difficult stories she calls she calls it an SFD. That is a swear word beginning with S. So for those of you who are not into swearing, let's call it a silly first draft. And what she talks about is us enabling ourselves to be able to actually go, do you know what? I'm late, I've got up late, and I'm really, really irritated with myself. Right, I'm noticing I'm irritated with myself, and then I might have a catalogue of things that are happening in my inner chatter, and I start berating myself, and I start putting myself down, and I'm cross with myself. And that in itself starts to paralyse how I am and how I progress through that morning. If we can catch the story, that SFD, and we can separate out the feeling and actually the chatter and go, right, I've got up late. It's not great. It's not a brilliant start to my day. I can recover. I'm okay. This is what I now need to do. These are the things I need to put into place to manage it. The outcome would be significantly different. Now, probably you're all sitting there smiling away going, if only I could do this. Here's the good news, you can. Sheryl Sandberg, who is, I think she is still COO of Facebook, love this, think it's a fantastic quote. And again, often people are asking me if I'm asking them to do some work, or we're exploring the SFD, or we're looking at separating emotions and behaviours, they ask for context. And I think for me, this captures the fact that context is an impact, can impact on our behaviour. In essence, though, we are the same person, whether we are the professional version of ourselves or the personal version of ourselves. So actually, we need to look at some of these things in quite a holistic manner. So here's the words that I talked about earlier: emotional agility. What we're looking at here is our ability to notice how we're feeling now. So even when you're listening to me, you will have a feeling about that, you'll be reacting as I'm speaking. What this is about is our ability, yours and mine, to be able to unstick in any situation how we're feeling, pause, have a bit of space, and enable us to step forward to manage a conscious decision of how we're going to behave around that. So what's really interesting is I work with a lot of people, and a lot of people who are stressed. It's a very common word bandied around, something that you will know. It can impact sick levels at work. It can impact people's performance. It can impact staff turnover. My question is, are people actually stressed? Or is it that there's a lack of recognition of how they're actually feeling? So stress is a massively big word. If we start to scratch the surface and say, are you stressed, or is there a more specific emotion carrying in there? Are you angry? Are you disappointed? Or are you sad? It's quite a tough one to start to understand. to unpick that for self. And this ability to manage that agility, that ability to notice those feelings, that emotion that's running, is the skill of emotional agility. Susan David, which is where the quote comes from on the previous slide, talks about 4 concepts of emotional agility. What she's suggesting here is that we become, and you'll have heard me through this process talk about the word notice. So notice is about curiosity. What are my feelings and thoughts in any 1 second? What's actually going on in this moment? How do I feel about that? How's that influencing my thinking? And interestingly, she talks about 2 types of thinking. Type 1 thinking is very typical and probably the healthier version of our thinking, which is around us actually seeing what situation we're in, making a judgment, evaluating it, and then making safe decisions. And that in itself is good thinking, really, really positive. She then goes on to say that there's a second type, type 2, of the way we think. And type 2 is very typically the shoulds. Anyone that knows me, not a massive fan of that word, should. These are the internal struggles that we begin to have. So some of the common things that can happen here is you have a feeling on a feeling. So I'm sad that I'm unhappy. I shouldn't be worried. It's really silly that I feel so anxious in this situation. So you can see with the language there that we're beginning to be very critical. We're not being very aware of actually what we're feeling. I mean, if anything, we're dismissing it. And the shoulda, coulda, woulda stuff that goes on in our mind's eye is the bit that she's starting to invite us to notice in the showing up bit. So step into it. What's actually going on? The other comment in that arena really is to think, well, I suppose it's a top tip really rather than a comment. If in your language and in your way of thinking you are a shoulda, a should, a should, a should, my invitation to you is to begin to maybe release the grip of should and invite you to replace the word should with the word could. And what starts to happen then is it becomes less compelling. So it's just a small tip for you there. So the second concept in emotional agility is about stepping out. It's about finding space between feelings and thought. So if for any reason something happens, so one of the examples that some of you have heard maybe me talk about is a majority of the population and most of us here will drive. And the majority of us will have experienced somebody pulling out in front of us, which is a little bit irritating. And for many of us, probably a little bit more than irritating. So we then have a bit of a choice if we know that it irritates us. If we can create space between somebody pulling out in front of us and cutting us up, and then we notice how we feel, and we notice the space once we've got it between the feeling and the thought and then the action, we can have some better outcomes. So it might be the person pulls out, you leap from them pulling out to hand firmly on the horn, a little bit of flashing of the lights, maybe a bit of gesticulation, maybe closely driving to their rear bumper, possibly a very, very bad outcome. And also not a great outcome for your state if you think about what we said. So you'll be in quite a heightened state then. If stepping out, you can find a little bit of space between somebody's just cut me up, I'm really, really hacked off about that. I use the polite word there. Okay, I'm noticing I'm hacked off, I'm curious I'm hacked off. What choices do I have now? You could still do the first choice that we've just highlighted. You could actually stick the radio on, stick ABBA on, sing Dancing Queen at the top of your voice and release that feeling. There may be other choices in there. So if we can take that breath and be curious and notice the difference between the feeling and the thought and the action, that's what they're talking about in stepping out. The third concept, walking your why, kind of a bit of a favourite of mine. What's your purpose? What is it that actually is your purpose? And that connects to your core values, which are your core drivers. So when things derail us and we have an emotional response to things, very typically we lose complete sight of the why. In context, if something happens in a meeting, so you're sitting in a meeting, you're contributing to a meeting and nobody's listening. And therefore you have a bit of an emotional response to that, and you might sort of have a behavioural response to that, which means you sit back and you stop contributing. Or worst case, you could leave the meeting. Another option is you could start speaking louder. So there may be some like a response to that through the feeling. If we can actually get to walking your why, so what is the purpose of you? What is going on in that meeting? What's your purpose for actually contributing? What's the reason and what's the driver for you contributing? If you can hook into the fact, actually, I'd like them to just know that I've got a different viewpoint, and the reason I'd like them to know that is because that might offer a fair and balanced view on this situation. What that can lead to, if we can hold on to that, is that you go, do you know what? I don't feel like I'm being listened to, and I'm still going to contribute into the meeting. And what you'll notice there with my language is that I've put the and in. So you have the feeling, it is what it is, and you choose a behaviour that's okay and still meets your why. The fourth concept that she talks about is moving on. So I love this phrase, purposeful tweaks, and this is what change is about. It's about looking at, this is my mindset, what can I do to tweak it to make it even better, or what can I do to start to align it to my core values? So if we took these four concepts, which at the moment you're probably looking at that slide thinking, flipping it, that sounds really hard. It's a work in progress. It's like anything. Those of you that know me, I come from a sports background. And in sport, if you think about sport, what that's about is it's about the skill and it's about the knowledge of that sport. And we gain that through going to practice, through coaching, through practice until it's in our DNA. And training and practice are really, really key in sport. This is no different. It's about taking these concepts, unpicking them, getting to grips with them and having a working understanding. And then it's all about the training and the practice. So it's a permanent work in progress. So every day it's about good habits of noticing some of these things. And if you even just take one of these and get curious about one of them, that's a step forward to invoking some change that you might want to make around your emotional agility. So I'm hoping at this point, all of you have access to a pen and paper. I'm going to ask you 2, 3, 4, 5 questions, and I'm going to leave some space for you to sit and write. I'm also going to go at a little bit of a pace to not allow the chatter to get too involved in your mind's eye. So the first thing I would like you to write down is, in the moment now, where you're at now on this webinar, I want you to write down, I am feeling, and then write the feeling down that you have, or the couple of feelings that you might notice. Those of you that are hesitating or struggling, it will be perfectly brilliant, whatever you write, because it's yours and no one else can see it. The next thing I'd like you to write is to build on that. So you have written, I am feeling, and whatever that is, because. The third thing is building on this, I am feeling, whatever you've written, because, whatever you've written, and my thoughts are. The fourth thing, building on this, so you have your feelings, the because, your thoughts, and my body sensations are. So you'll remember earlier on we talked about a physiological reaction when we have emotional hijacking. So notice what's going on for you physiologically and in your body now. And then the sort of stretch, if you like, the next step on this activity is building on everything you've written. I'd like you to act what your behaviour is. So you might actually be sitting and listening in this webinar. There may be a little itch inside that says, actually, I'd rather be behaving in a different way. So just notice that and see whether you can capture it. So we've gone through a number of slides that really I wouldn't even say we've trotted through, we've galloped through quite significant theoretical base. And what we've done with this last slide is unpick it into it's the so what. So what does this look like in action and where do I start with it? So to start to understand emotional agility and to get some of this underpinning skill set to be able to manage that day-to-day impact of stuff, so the getting up late, the spilling the coffee, somebody's really irritated you at work, the bigger stuff that happens at work where you're in a working relationship that's not working well, or the smaller stuff that happens that has a big impact whereby you feel you haven't got time for some lunch, which is quite significant that you do actually eat. So these things that can derail us in any 1 second. What we've done and what we've shared here in these slides is some of the baseline theory and then starting to put a first building block in on if we become and develop our if we become emotionally agile and develop our emotional agility in the context of us understanding how emotions influence thoughts and behaviours and outcomes, this is a first step. It's not the only first step, it's a first step where we typically start. So the next slide, piece of paper and a pen again, please, is I'm a bit of a person that's actually about action. So love my theory. With my sports background, I'm like, right, what we're going to do about it. So this next slide is what we're going to do about it. So in relation to, you may be potentially looking at developing your emotional agility, which will support you to build up your skill sets and your repertoire and your ability to bounce back once derailed in a day or in a moment. This is what I would like you to do. I'm going to read this at a pace, so although you can see it, I'd invite you to maybe just tune into the listening here. In relation to minimising, derailing your day, what would you like to have happen? So in relation to minimising, derailing your day, what would you like to have happen? Capture it and write it down. So whatever you've decided that you would like to have happen, what needs to happen for that to happen? What needs to happen for that to happen? And can what needs to happen happen? And can what needs to happen happen? And will you do what needs to happen? And will you do what needs to happen? So, taking away from this webinar, you will now have a little bit of an insight to how you felt during this last 40 minutes. And all being well, and I did go at a very conscious pace with this last slide, you will have an idea of what you want to do moving forward in relation to managing how you're going to prevent or minimise the derailing of your day. As with anything, when we're learning, when we're developing, when we're growing, when we're stepping out of our comfort zone, and that growth, if you like, whether that's through, I don't know, coaching, training, speaking, whatever that process is for you that you need, it really is that commitment to wanting to make a change and then recognising that actually it takes the commitment of practising it and starting to change it into a new habit. And if we can gain the consistency, that's when it changes and becomes a new normal for you. So, thank you for listening.